If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. It's free. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Welcome to the New Chemist. We're glad you're listening. Feel free to download this podcast on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and a variety of other platforms. Here on the New Chemist, we discuss chemistry, which simply put is the science of change, as well as careers, community, research, and COVID-19. We're happy you're tuning in. My guest today is Mr. Greg Zuckerman. Thanks for joining me today. It is good to hear from you. Just briefly, I'll inform my audience about you. Mr. Greg Zuckerman is a 3-time Gerald Loeb Award winner. He's the author of the multi-award-winning book, The Fracas, the outrageous inside story of the new billionaire wildcatters. And he regularly appears on CNBC, Fox Business, Yahoo Finance, Bloomberg Television, NPR, BBC, ABC, and numerous other radio stations and television channels around the globe. The topic of focus today will be COVID-19, specifically his new book, A Shot to Save the World, which is the inside story of the life or death race for a COVID-19 vaccine. Please welcome Mr. Greg Zuckerman. Today we'll be focusing primarily on his latest book, A Shot to Save the World. And I think this will be a really good and exciting conversation. He has highlighted the work of several key people from Moderna, BioNTech, Pfizer, Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center, Novavax, Oxford University, and several academic researchers. A really established and distinguished journalist. Please welcome Greg Zuckerman. So, in your book, you highlight that success of vaccines can be a model for society, showing how private industry can work hand in hand with government bodies. The COVID-19 vaccine revolutionaries are now focusing on new challenges, including cancer, AIDS, malaria, multiple sclerosis, and more. So from reading this far, it appears as if the incremental success affiliated with vaccination policies can serve as a model for society. In what way do you see this occurring? And how is this feasible in the long term?
Hey, so first of all, happy to be here. Nice to be in touch. And thank you for the interest in my new book, A Shot to Save the World. I guess I would say, first and foremost, that these vaccines are the greatest achievement of modern science. I think we're a little too close to those accomplishments to appreciate them fully, but in time we will appreciate them. And in some ways they are a model, as you kind of suggest. Private industry worked with government agencies like never before. And these vaccines were accomplished in a record pace, record speed, 330 days. So it's only because government worked hand in hand with private industry.
Yeah, that's true. So do you see other pathologies or other diseases being progress or treatments being progressed as fast as this one as it pertains to government and industry and government and private partnerships, or is that far short?
I'm a little skeptical. The government, Operation Warp Speed, investors, they all wrote big checks in the hopes of getting out of this pandemic quickly, and it worked. We succeeded, but would we all do this again? I hope. Well, if there's ever another pandemic, maybe we would, and hopefully there isn't another pandemic. But I don't know if we could do the same thing again. I'd like to think that government would work hand in hand with private industry, and the NIH and other government scientists do have a nice long history of working with private industry, Moderna and other kind of companies. But in terms of this kind of urgency, I don't know if we could do it again.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair. So in the meta narrative, from my understanding, the book appears to be a really condensed meta narrative of what went right with vaccinations during the pandemic. Outside of consistency, outside of your primary goal of accuracy and consistency with presenting the facts of the situation, what were some other goals affiliated with this project?
Well, I like to entertain as much as I do inform. I think if you're going to spend a few hours with a book and spend the money on a book, it should be an enjoyable experience too. So what I try to do is get at some important and potentially boring or dense topics through the people. And that's the way I do it. I think they can be inspiring. They were inspiring to me. And that's part of why I wrote this book, to learn myself. And these characters, these scientists, these researchers they're entertaining, but they're also inspiring. And that's my goal as well, to inspire, to educate, and inform and entertain as well.
Okay, that's good. It's very good. So in your book, it's noted that many vaccination efforts were challenged. Namely, Moderna didn't have the money to make the vaccine as recently as May 2020, and Pfizer and BioNTech executives were unable to decide on the vaccine design, affecting their own efforts. Oxford University scientists weren't convinced the virus was a true threat and needed the stimulus of junior researchers to foster focusing on a vaccine. So how do you think risk management and analysis came into play when this vaccine was produced?
Well, it is important to remember that as effective and as protective as these vaccines are, they weren't a sure thing. We didn't really know whether they would work. And there was a lot of drama that I discovered doing the research for my book. And hopefully the people will enjoy reading about that drama in the book. As you said, Moderna, as recently as May 2020, they weren't sure they were going to have money. Researchers at Oxford were sort of torn and whether this was going to be a pandemic or not, or a virus that they should be focusing on. The Pfizer group, first BioNTech couldn't convince Pfizer to focus on a vaccine. And then even when they did, they were split on what kind of vaccine to build. So it's really important to understand that we should be grateful. These vaccines, it wasn't a sure thing they would work out, and they have worked out. So there was a lot of drama behind the scenes that I wasn't aware of.
Okay, that's fair. So do you think molecular biology, genetics, and therapeutics, are those fields were accelerated in terms of their capacity to implement translational research? Or was it just or was this fast progress just based on the needs and the circumstances of the time?
Well, my book is really about the history of the last few years and actually the few decades that really led up to these approaches. I mean, people weren't really focused on them. They weren't aware. But for years, scientists have been working on mRNA, and they were very kind of stubborn and resilient and persistent. The conventional wisdom was that we shouldn't waste time on mRNA, and yet these scientists ignore the conventional wisdom. So, and the same thing with the adenovirus approach, which led to the J&J and the AstraZeneca vaccines. Again, the conventional wisdom was it wouldn't work out. People shouldn't waste their time on them. So there was really a lot of history that went into these approaches. Yes, they turned around quickly and they worked quickly, obviously, last year, but it wasn't like they were thrown together quickly last year. There was a lot of work going into last year that I think people need to be aware of, and is really heroic work that I think people need to acknowledge and be grateful for. And that's kind of what my book is about, the heroic work that took place in 2020 last year, but also in the years leading up to 2020.
I've noticed that the book is categorized based on, or it's portioned based on years and time frames. So a classic risk management model involves periods where you monitor, respond, you adjust, you implement, you assess, you authorize, you prepare, categorize, or select. Where do you think we're spending most of our time as in our response to this pandemic? Do you think our time is being spent primarily on responding to it, or implementing changes, or preparing for the changes that will come about from all these various variants? Where do you think we're spending most of our time based on your studies and work that you've done thus far on the pandemic?
Well, what's clear is we have not spent enough time on preparing for new viruses. There'll be new ones that emerge. There'll be maybe even new pandemics potentially. We're in an age of lethal viruses. Amid global warming, we're encroaching on the animal kingdom more than ever. There's airline flights that's potentially spread disease all over the world. So we need to be much better prepared. And frankly, there were warnings about about a virus, not this one specifically, but a virus, and that we need to be better prepared. And most governments ignored the warnings. There wasn't much preparation. We didn't have basic testing kits ready. We didn't have basic masks. We had to import them, and they were often faulty. Took early in the pandemic, we didn't have enough masks, and it was a really scary kind of thing. So we don't do a good enough job in society with preparing for these potentialities. We're good at scrambling and adjusting and addressing them when they emerge, but we do need to do a much better job of preparing.
Okay, that's fair. So, continuing this conversation, I did some research, and some key vaccination facts from the World Health Organization state that immunization through vaccination is one of the safest ways to protect against disease. It is always best to get vaccinated, even when the risk of infection is low. This is what the World Health Organization is saying. Combined vaccines are safe and beneficial. There is no link between vaccines and autism. This came from a myth from a 1998 study that was quickly found to be seriously flawed. And the study was ileal lymphoid nodular hyperplasia, non-specific colitis, and pervasive developmental disorder in the children. And that was in the Lancet. And that study was found to be seriously flawed. And finally, if we stop vaccination, deadly disease will return. So these are key facts that the World Health Organization, from their comprehensive work and robust studies, they've decided that people should be aware of these things. So how do you think we can combat vaccine misinformation? How do you think we can combat that?
It's a really great question. It troubles me very much. The scientists they went all out to develop these vaccines. They succeeded, effective, protective vaccines, safe vaccines. And yet a percentage of the populace doesn't care and would rather rely on some YouTube video that their brother-in-law told them about, as opposed to the guidance of their internists that they trusted for years. It's perplexing to me and confounding. What do we do about it? Well, I'm trying to do my part, frankly. I think my book should be reassuring to people, and I'm trying to get out there and talk to people, and I've done speeches and done media with vaccine hesitant groups. And what I try to emphasize is that these vaccines were not done overnight. There was years of work that was dedicated to developing them. They were not rushed. There weren't corners that were cut. And I think what's important to emphasize, and frankly, I don't think we do enough, the government and other kinds of people. Listen, there are two types of vaccine hesitant people. There are people that believe that Bill Gates is putting a chip inside our brains, and it's hard to rationalize with those people. But there are a lot of other people that are quite measured and concerned and reasonable. And they're wary because they say, well, Greg, you told me that the average vaccine takes 10 years. The fastest vaccine until last year was 4 years. That's mumps. And now you're telling me that in 330 days, we created this new vaccine with a new technology. So I'm concerned. And I understand why those people are wary. They have reason to be wary. So what I try to emphasize is, well, A, the years that went into these vaccines, but B, the reason why we went so quickly, we were able to develop it so quickly, is because we developed these vaccines. We did different stages, different phases simultaneously. I don't mean phases as in phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, but I mean that historically what we did was develop a vaccine and test a vaccine, and then you manufactured a vaccine. 3 distinct stages that take years. But for the first time ever, we did things simultaneously. We manufactured vaccines, for example, before we even knew that they were going to be effective. And we never did that historically because we didn't have the money for that. Why would you spend billions and billions of dollars manufacturing a vaccine when you don't even know it's going to work or not? Mm-hmm. And the only reason we could do that is the money was available. So again, we didn't cut any corners. We just did things simultaneously for the first time. And I think when you emphasize that, when people know that, when people understand that, it's reassuring to them, and it should be reassuring to them. So we manufactured these vaccines before we even knew they were going to be effective because we were taking a risk. It was money risk more than anything. It wasn't safety or health. So that explains why we went so quickly. And I think that should be reassuring for people.
And I also think, along the same lines, just because a result is novel or a result is new doesn't mean the components haven't been developed over a long period of time. And the techniques haven't been developed over a long period of time. So yeah, I completely agree.
That's a very good point.
Yes.
That's a great point. Yeah.
Yeah. It takes time to develop techniques, the skills, all of the parameters, all of those things.
Yeah.
It takes time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in science,
right. They were applied. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. In science, what?
In science, many times we come up with new results, but the techniques were in the works from years, sometimes decades before we even began. So yeah, you go ahead.
What else? Do you have other examples of that? That's a very good point.
So for example, like in chemistry and synthetic chemistry, we come up with new molecules all the time, but like stereoselectivity, asymmetric organic catalysis, all those organic catalysis, all of those things have been developed over time. Even though the things we can get may be novel, we may get a new product that we have to characterize through NMR, mass spec, and a variety of other techniques. But even the techniques that we use to characterize that new product, they were developed over time. So yeah. So
That's a great point. That's a great point.
Yeah. So go ahead.
I think that's important to emphasize for people, right? Hopefully that's kind of thing that can reassure people. So yeah, we developed it quickly, but the techniques were not developed quickly. I think that should be reassuring for people. And that's part of the reason I wrote this book.
Yeah, I agree. So do you think anecdotal evidence provides a basis for scientific decisions? If it is not grounded, peer-reviewed, unbiased, and data-driven?
No, it all needs to be data-driven and peer-reviewed.
Okay.
Unfortunately, in this case, sometimes the studies had to be released before they were peer-reviewed, but eventually they were. So eventually we get there. It's just that we were in a pandemic and it wasn't the time. But it wasn't like any huge decisions were made or vaccines were shared, were distributed before the data was there. I mean, these vaccines were tested on tens of thousands of people, and at this point, over 1 billion people have them inside them. So, people should be reassured at this point.
Yeah. So, one more question along this pandemic, and then we'll discuss your career thus far. Why do you think conspiracy theories became so popular during this pandemic?
It's a great question. You step on a nail. And I'm sorry.
I think I think it's a good question in that I think many times, sometimes the facts of the situation were being adjusted or spun, and people were looking at them with different political views or beliefs or presuppositions or mental models or principles. So of course it was going to result in different outcomes or different ideas about the situation because the facts of the situation were being spun. as opposed to being looked at from an objective or an empirical standpoint or basis. But you go ahead. Why do you think conspiracy theories became so popular?
Yeah, well, to your point, that is all true. The only question is why today are there more of these? Why are they spinning it more? Why are there more conspiracy theories in the past? I mean, I was saying, if you step on a nail, I don't care who you are, you go and get a tetanus shot. I don't see people questioning, well, who just developed the tetanus shot? How fast was the tetanus shot developed? How many people have received the tetanus shot? I think I'm going to wait on this tetanus shot. Maybe it's changing my DNA. You don't hear that at all. People just go get a tetanus shot. For some reason, in this pandemic, these vaccines became politicized. I think it's partly, it speaks to where we are in society. Everything is politicized. I don't care what it is. Everything, sadly, is a reflection of politics, and it's tribal. My team versus your team, and your team versus my team. Oh, you like the vaccines, then I can't like the vaccines. You don't like the vaccines, then I can't have any questions about the vaccines. And it's a sad reflection of where America is today. I mean, I guess to some extent, broader society, other countries too. I see same kind of conspiracy theories in Germany and England as well. I think it could be just where we are in terms of how we obtain our information today. People don't read books like they used to. I've written a book and it's doing fine, but it seems like mainstream media, newspapers, people don't get their information. They get their information from YouTube and Facebook and their brother-in-law's cousin. So sadly, there's this question of information. I mean, it does stem from a healthy impulse. People today feel empowered. People feel they can get their own information. Don't tell me what to do. I'm going to do my own research. And that can be healthy. There's something to be said for that. I'm a believer in people becoming informed. And it used to be that you go to a doctor and they put you in a trial, and now people, let's say you've got a disease of some kind, now people do their own research. They tell their doctor, hey, I'd like to be in this trial. And it goes back decades. I start off my book with HIV and the chase for an HIV vaccine, and HIV patients often were not part of the process, and things have changed since then. And it's good to be empowered and to feel part of the process, but you also need to defer to the experts to some extent, and scientists, and they are trying to help and they're trying to heal and come up with vaccines and medicines. And to be accuse people in health and public health policy of doing harm is just awful and discouraging for somebody like myself.
Yeah, I completely agree. And, I'll just give this classic example. I don't go to my principal investigator and tell him how I think he should do research on the metallo chaperone. I take his advice and proceed forward, considering how he's the expert in this instance, in this situation. So, I think it's important, and I think your book, it was timely and it's very seminal. And I think it'll be a good addition to the information that we have up there right now. So, concerning your career, you've been successful as a Wall Street Journal special writer. What have been your long-standing interests in the fields of science and journalism? What have been your interests that have lasted so long?
Well, I write about all kinds of different areas. I'm not a science writer per se. I just look for good stories. So I'm an investigative reporter right now, and a lot of what I do is focusing on the bad and the good. I like strikeouts and home runs is the way I look at it. So it's companies, it's firms, it's individuals that do really remarkable achievements. I wrote a book a few years ago about the energy revolution in the United States and how we went from a country that was running out of oil and gas to discovering huge amounts of it, so much so that the United States is actually exporting oil and gas. And I wrote about the individuals that are responsible, and they're smaller companies, they're geologists, they're interesting wildcatters, people like that. I like to do that kind of thing. I wrote a book a few years ago called The Man Who Solved the Market, and that's about those individuals, and they're usually scientists and they're mathematicians who developed a way to invest, a new way to build algorithms, to predictive algorithms way before Facebook and Silicon Valley was using predictive algorithms, and how they conquered the market. So I like to write about big achievements and how individuals pull them off, and companies and scientists, how they pulled off those big achievements and changed society. And this one, my new book, A Shot to Save the World, is really encapsulates that theme of unlikely individuals. And it's usually unlikely individuals that I like to write about, unlikely companies, etc., scientists, mathematicians, etc., who changed the world.
Yeah, I think that's very useful because people can learn from them and extract ideas, mental models, principles on how they thought about the situation, and try and apply some of their thinking and ideas to their own personal lives. So, how do you maintain view of the bigger picture in your career and in your life in general?
How do I'm sorry, maintain the bigger picture?
Yeah, view of the bigger picture. How do you see the forest for the trees, and how do you keep perspective, essentially?
So it helps that I'm a generalist. I'm not an expert. I'm not a scientist. I probably got B's at most taking my classes in science growing up. So I come at every topic as an outsider, and I'm fascinated by these achievements. So to me, it really helps. It really helps that that I'm an outsider. I mean, to me, it really is important to be to maintain the perspective of an outsider. It helps me be impressed by these individuals. It helps me be a little bit skeptical too. I'm not too caught up in it. So it helps that I'm an outsider and not an expert. And it hurts me as well. So it's a challenge I have to become an expert on some of these areas. And I hired a PhD to tutor me. She's in a lab in Newark, and she worked with me on educating me on various aspects. And a lot of the scientists, the vaccine, the virologists, the vaccine specialists, the researchers, they all walked me through a lot of the topics and the issues, and that helped me as well.
Yeah, that's good. And that answers the following question. How that explains how you are adaptive and creative in the fields of science and journalism. So how did you seek or find the right environment for you to thrive scientifically and intellectually? How did you end up at the Wall Street Journal as a special writer? How do you achieve that career achievement? How did you reach there?
I started off at a small little newsletter, and then I went to the New York Post, and then I went to the Wall Street Journal. I've been there since 1996. And basically, I worked my way up, and I proved myself. And then at the Journal, I've done various different beats, different topics, different areas of investigation. But now I'm in an investigative unit. So they give me a lot of leeway. I come up with good ideas, hopefully, or they have good ideas for me to research, to run after, to target. And but there's a lot of flexibility. Sometimes I write about science. Sometimes I write about the energy world. I write about finance. So I'm very, very blessed and lucky that I have this kind of leeway. I mean, the challenge is to be an expert in all these different areas and to find the right people to talk to. So that's my challenge. But the good thing is I never get bored. There's always some interesting area to write about.
Yeah, that's good, because I've heard people discuss. It brings up several key ideas. Expertise could be a function of time, mentorship, resources, exploration, and exposure. So that's one thing, as well as I've heard people talk about jumping from one S-curve to the next, in which you're developing, constantly learning, plateauing, and then developing, constantly learning, doing well. And so in terms of disrupting yourself in your career, so that's very good. So what have been your most effective and impactful ideas to date? I would say this book is very impactful. I would say your New York Times bestseller was impactful. What have been your most impactful ideas?
Well, I don't know about ideas, but I have had impactful stories. I hope so. My books have had some impact. I've written also 2 books for young people. I wrote 2 books with my sons. We wrote books to inspire young people. They're called Rising Above and Rising Above Female Athletes. The first is mostly male athletes, and the second are female athletes. And the idea was we wanted to speak to the athletes and find out how they overcame challenges in their youth. And it's trying to be entertaining, but also inspiring for young people. And I'm very proud that a lot of young people, this is their first book they've read. And a lot of adults give them to their children around Christmas time to inspire them. And I've been inspired. My sons and I both have been inspired by these stories of the athletes. And what they overcame. So I'm hoping other people are inspired as well.
Stories of victory can lead to inspiring others. I completely agree. So, how do you maintain a balanced life given all your responsibilities and accomplishments? How do you strive to maintain a sense of balance or a sense of priority given all your responsibilities and accomplishments?
So I have a family that I cherish, and they demand attention, and that keeps things in perspective. But I'm religious as well, so I keep the Sabbath, the Jewish Sabbath, and that forces me to turn off my phone and my computer for 25 hours from Friday night to Saturday. I'm overwhelmed with work, and I'm the 25 hours, but to turn things off for 25 hours, I don't answer emails, I don't send emails, I don't use the electricity. While I was younger, that seemed it was a real challenge, and I had friends that were going to the movies and doing fun things and television on the Sabbath. As I get older, I appreciate it, and it really is very helpful for me. I can recharge. Ironically, I'm not using electronics, electricity, no phones, but it helps me recharge, and I find it very, very, very beneficial to keep the Sabbath.
Idea. I'm a Christian as well, and keeping the Sabbath is an important practice, very important practice. So, how have you been so successful as a special writer? Would you say it's the time that you put in? Would you say it's a mentorship that you were given as you progress from the small newsletter to the New York Post, to the Wall Street Journal? What would you say has been the key factor in your success thus far?
I wish I had mentors. I never really did, to be frank with you. I've had good editors, but I've really never had any mentors. So I wish I had mentors, but if I've had success, it's because I'm curious, and I ask a lot of questions. My wife will say, maybe you have ask too many questions, it can drive her crazy, but I'm a curious person. So I find everyone has a story. Everyone has an interesting story. And I want to hear what their story is. So I've been lucky to have people that I can ask questions of and get help from. So there are always people to help you, be it in the world of science, be it in the world of finance, be it in the world of energy, all the areas that I've written about. They're always, if you ask enough questions, often enough people, there's someone who'll take the time to explain and to sit with you and work things out and hold your hand, as it were, on the phone, on an email. They'll make sure what you're writing is accurate. So if you ask enough people, you'll find people to help you. And you'd be surprised how many people are eager. Maybe they're just nice. Maybe they just want to see their name in the paper, and they want to make sure that it's not inaccurate. For whatever reason, people have different motivations. But I've always felt that if you ask enough people, there are people there to help.
I completely agree. Like, substance doesn't exist in a vacuum. By definition, a vacuum has nothing in it. So we live in community, and things are more interdependent than they appear to be. So I completely agree. It's good to have community, and it's good to lean on other people. So how have you maintained vision and teamwork in your environment? How do you facilitate collaboration with other people? How are you able to maintain view of the big goals for your projects? How do you maintain that?
Well, at the Wall Street Journal and with my books, they're always great people to work with. I'm very lucky. The Wall Street Journal and the staff are just super smart and hardworking, and the editors as well. So I'm lucky in that regard.
Okay, good. So do you have any advice to those wanting to pursue the field you are currently working in?
Ask a lot of questions. Show you can break news. There's always a need for people to break news, just look for an area that maybe you can specialize in, do a little bit better than everybody else.
I completely agree. Yeah, so expertise and specialization does favor people. So what has been the most beneficial advice you have received to date? If you were to summarize the advice that you've received, or consolidate or condense it, what would you say has been some seminal advice that you remember or that comes to mind and that is helpful to you?
Well, my father was an academic. He's passed away, but he was a professor, and he wrote as well. And he was a very good writer. He wrote a few books too. And he always said, keep things tight, cut things out that are extraneous. Don't write longer than you need to. he was always cutting things out of my writing. So I've always remembered that.
Okay, that's good. Well, thank you, Mr. Zuckerman. Thank you, Greg, for
Sure.
this interview. I really appreciate it. And thank you again for the conversation.
Great to be here.
Thanks for listening. We're glad you were able to tune into this podcast. Once again, this is The New Chemist, where we discuss chemistry, which simply put is the science of change, as well as the other sciences, careers, community, research, and COVID-19. Thanks again for listening. Note, the views on this podcast represent those of my guests and I.